What's up, Wizards? It's Deb from The Place, and today we're going to be talking about my top 10 favorite Commander decks. And then after that, we're going to be talking about all the best appetizers to serve during your Commander nights. And then we're going to really switch gears and talk about Pokemon cards after that. What's up? What's that? Oh, people actually care about Standard again? Oh, thank God. Yeah, it seemed until about a week ago, everybody felt that Standard was worth about as much as a dry fart from a wet dog. But now, 75K Standard Open over there on MagicCon Chicago. Got a couple of more big money tournaments coming up. More on that in just a second. Everyone's interested again. And so who's in the best position on YouTube? It's probably Covert Go Blue. But I come in a solid, like, 5th. So maybe you found your way to me today because you're actually interested in playing paper Standard again. Never thought we'd say that, but here we are, right? Problem is, you don't want to spend a whole lot of money. This makes perfect sense. You're a very reasonable person. Money is expensive. So with that in mind, I feel like the best way for me to do my job today is to focus on something that we used to focus on a lot more around here, and I actually really like talking about. Today, let's highlight the top 10 budget cards in MKM Standard. And I'm your favorite Magic Channel's favorite Magic Channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck tech. And we're back. Make sure you like and subscribe while we go over the rules for this list real briefly, because there have to be some rules, right? First of all, the most important one is that all these cards are under $1 on TCG Player right now. Another rule that I'm putting in air quotes and raising an eyebrow to, because honestly, I probably played pretty hard and fast with this one on a couple of entries, but either way, these have to be cards that you could feasibly like build a deck around, right? Because anybody could make this list and be like, hey, Go for the Throat's like 50 cents right now. That's under $1. It's a really good card. Like, yeah, it's a really good card, but you're not building a deck around Go for the Throat. So again, these are by and large going to be build arounds. And finally, just so we don't get it twisted, these are not necessarily sleeper cards. That's actually going to be the next video. The patrons voted on the top 10 sleepers in Standard. Subscribe for that content. But either way, these are specifically budget cards that you've probably heard of, but play massive roles in Standard. So if you're looking to get a Standard deck started that's like tier 1, tier 2, something like that, these are going to be very, very important pieces to add to the deck that are all well under $1 and may inform your choices as to what deck you actually go in there with. And you're probably going to be going in somewhere, right? There's a bunch of tournaments in the upcoming season or two here. Wizards has decided they're going to try to revitalize Standard this year. And we've had a ton of big tournaments that have already happened or are about to happen, right? We just had that big $75,000 open at MagicCon Chicago. And did you know we're about to have a $10,000 open at Con Richmond? Did you know that? I'm telling you now. Con Richmond starts on March 15th and ends on March 17th. And somewhere in the middle there, you can win yourself $5,000 by taking first in their Standard Open. Misty Mountain Gaming is partnering with the GalaxyCon series to bring you that tournament and a bunch of other tournaments on that weekend, by the way. They're doing a 15K Modern Open if you're into that kind of thing. They got Pioneer Opens at that stinking thing, drafts for days in case you're interested. They have 2 CEDH tournaments, one for a cash prize and the other one that's really interesting because the winner of one of the CEDH tournaments over that weekend actually takes home a whole set of revised dual lands. MMG has given a lot of prize support to the like 25 plus tournaments that are going on that weekend. Plus, again, that 10K Standard tournament is pretty ridiculous. So if you're in Richmond, Virginia from March 15th to the 17th, check out Con Richmond. A lot of stuff going on there. And if you wanted a big Standard tournament to attend and actually get your Standard chops back going, this is the perfect chance. So Con Richmond, March 15th through the 17th. And thanks to Misty Mountain Gaming for sponsoring this portion of the video. Appreciate you guys. Hey, sorry to spring an ad read on you like that. I don't usually do a whole lot of those, but it's because people that reach out to me are like mostly gaming chair companies, and I'm just like, get out of my inbox. But when you tell me that you're doing a $10,000 Standard tournament and you want me to say your name, like, I'd be more than happy to get people out there. Standard is back in a big way, and it's in part thanks to events like this. All that said, if you want to be the one to kick in the door and take home $5,000 with your budget little kitchen table deck, then you probably want to at least talk about some budget cards. What even are the cards in Standard? Let's actually talk about them now. Number 11, I guess we'll call it. The honorable mention for this video, because you know I've always got one, is Kaa Intangible Slayer. Now, Standard is, in case you didn't know this, in a kind of unique position right now where there's actually a bunch of decks that play like 7-drop cards. Right? A ton of decks play Breach the Multiverse, Atali, Atraxa. There's all these extremely high mana value cards floating around in Standard at the top end right now. And Kaa may not be as immediately impactful as all of those cards, but in the long run, she's harder to beat than any of them. You know, a common MTG design trope that we sometimes discuss is that if a card is 7 mana, it should basically say, you win the game on it. And Kaya does. To her credit, she kind of does say that. But in this day and age, people are not very patient, and they want to add a word to the end of that sentence. They want 7 mana cards to say you win the game immediately. You win the game now. And this does not say that. So it's not quite an Atraxa on turn 5 that forces your opponent to scoop the moment it resolves. But if your opponent is smart, they will scoop the moment this resolves. Now, I can't stand here in good conscience in front of the entire internet and tell you that Kai is just as good as all those other cards we've been talking about. Atraxa, Atali, Breach the Multiverse. These are amazing cards that kind of do say you win the game right now. So they're pretty good. However, Kaya, way cheaper than all those other cards, which on some level gives her an advantage, right? Right now, a Breach the Multiverse, it's like $6.50, which is too much for me, to be honest. But once you get up to stuff like a Tally, that's like $20. Atraxa, $25.30 for a copy of that card. Whereas Kaya, on the other hand, 55 cents to put this card in your deck. And if you need more cards, she can do that for you too. They land a big threat, she can take care of that. Just she does everything, and your opponent can effectively never remove it unless they have a very specific set of skills, Liam Neeson style. So I'm just not sure why people aren't playing this card more. Let's move on to the actual list here. Number 10 is Anim Pacal. I hope that I'm doing that name right. She's the 1000th moon. There are 999 other moons before this card, but this is the one, baby. So this thing is actually like way better than it looks, and it saw a little bit of play in MTGO League right when it first came out, and then people kind of stopped playing that deck for a while until War Leader's Call came out in the last set. War Leader's Call rejuvenated the Boros Convoke deck, one could say, and probably should say. Novice Inspector is probably the real secret to that deck being good again, but either way, I digress. This card has more or less been taken out of the deck now in favor of adding cards like War Leader's Call in case of the Gateway Express, but I'm not sure that was exactly the right call. Pun intended. Now, here's the thing, though. Let's say you want to play this Boros Convoke deck, but you can't afford War Leader's Call. It is currently the most expensive card in the deck at a little over $10. Well, Anim Pacal, what is she? 75 cents. That is much, much cheaper per card than having to pick up like 3 or 4 copies of War Leader's Call. And in some ways, I swear to you, Anim Pacal is just a better card. Funny enough, though, you actually don't have to take her out of the deck once you get your War Leader's Call. I'm convinced that she's actually pretty stupid with War Leader's Call, right? First of all, War Leader's Call is going to increase her power, so you get more gnomes out of her. The gnomes are going to be bigger, right? Because War Leader's Call is an anthem effect, and when you make the gnomes, you're going to deal a bunch of damage to your opponent. Like, I really feel like the Boros Convoke deck should probably try and make room for 1 or 2 copies of Anim. Even if you're not playing Boros Convoke, Anim Pacal has a couple of cool things she can do in Standard. A card that almost made this list was Angel Fire Ignition. Every time anybody plays it against me on Arena, I'm like, oh crap. What do I do about that exactly? So, and now they can play it again. Jeez, I'm screwed. So Angel Fire Ignition is a card that I don't feel like sees enough play and could have easily made this list itself. But to be honest, it's really good with an Anim Pacal. So I'll bring it up here. You know, if you're able to get an Anim Pacal down and then target her with this, then suddenly she gets really, really big. She's going to do a bunch of damage. She's going to make a bunch of gnomes. And then next turn, you just do it again. Just, you know, flash back the ignition and do it all over again. Get even more gnomes. She gets even larger. It's just actually a pretty disgusting little synergy. Not quite a combo, but definitely a synergy. There's a lot of reasons you want to put this card in your Boros deck. It is really, really good. Number 9 is Hidetsugu and Kairi at a whole 20 cents right now. And this card has always been good in Standard. It feels like with each new set that comes out, like one deck 5-0s a league with a Hidetsugu and Kairi in it, and we just never hear from it again. And that's a real shame because it looks like this card has a lot of work to do. Not only the tricks that we already knew about, right? We'd seen people do the Breach the Multiverse trick with it, where you get to deal a bunch of damage and cast like a free Breach or whatever. It seems pretty good, right? But back in the day when the card first came out, which doesn't actually seem that long ago when you think about it. Either way, we used to see the Explosive Singularity combo with this card, which basically just ends the game. It 20s the opponent all at one time, which is a pretty hilarious thing to be able to do. But in case you wanted a new trick for this old dog, you could always try Push-Pull, which just came out in the latest set, but does ridiculous things with Hidetsugu and Kairi. Matter of fact, the deck featuring this combo went something like 9-5, I believe, at MagicCon Chicago. So we've got a winning deck list with this card in it, with this combo in it, actually, to take a look at if you ever wanted to. Either way, it kind of works like you can pull a Hidetsugu and Kairi out of your yard with Push-Pull, or you can just play a Hidetsugu and Kairi and then put a Push-Pull on the top of your library. That means that if your opponent kills your Hitotsugu and Kairi before you draw that card, then you get to cast a free push-pull, deal a free 8 damage, and probably just get the Hitotsugu and Kairi back that just died from your graveyard. So pretty ridiculous little synergy. That's a combo. I call that a combo, but pretty dumb little combo right there too. And obviously blue-black is a good little shell right now for this card with a bunch of cheap, affordable cards that you could play in that shell. And this goes right at the top of the curve with all kinds of ridiculous tricks. We've seen it in Reenact the Crime lists already this season. So the card is doing work currently, and still somehow it stays at 20 cents. Pick up a copy of this, or 2 or 3 or 4, and see what kind of nutso stuff you can get up to. Number 8 is Shigeki Jukai Visionary. I remain convinced that there is a deck for this card, and there have been multiple decks for the card since Kamigawa Neon Dynasty came out, but never towards the top of the format. That said, I think it's because people just aren't focusing on creating the optimal build for this card. We move on to other things and blah, 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 but I still think that this channel ability could be the backbone for one of the best control lists in Standard, and honestly, right about now is the time where people are looking for the best control lists in Standard, and I think this card gives you an argument for banned. That's because a channel from Shigeki can get back all your No More Lies and Dissipates and Sunfalls, and in our other decks, it can get back stuff like Herd Migration, which is a pretty sweet card to be able to get back. Maybe you played it in the early game with its channel ability, and now you want to get it back and play it the actual card, you know what I'm saying? So really sweet for that situation too. This goes in a ton of decks right now, and you could always do the old trick where you just do like a Colossal Sky Turtle or something else like it, right? And you just loop Sky Turtle and Shigeki over and over, getting whatever cards you need in the interim, right? So the loop still exists. There's other ways to loop it besides Sky Turtle, but I remain convinced Sky Turtle's probably the best way to loop it. Either way, there's a lot of stuff you can do with Shigeki in super long games, and right now there's a ton of people trying to find the best long game deck in Standard, and I think Shigeki might be a part of it. My number 7 is Teething Wormlet. This card is under 50 cents right now. It doesn't even make any sense to me. Like, you would think just because of playing other formats, Commander, Cube, and you know, there's all kinds of other formats people might like a card like this. I just like the design of it, whatever. But the fact remains that it also looks really good competitively. You know, it's a single mana to get this card out. It gains you a bunch of life. It gets huge over the course of the game. So like, what's not to like about this? Especially when we just had a set come out that has a bunch of like random clues and stuff in it you get for like 1 mana, you know? Like, there's already a green-white artifacts deck that looks pretty good with this as kind of the 1-drop basis, but now you've also got Novice Inspector to play in that deck. If you want to go Simic, you've got Curse of the Filched Falcon. There's a ton of ways to get not only like artifacts on the table to help this card out, but now those artifacts draw into more artifacts if you pop them, the clues, right? So just more ways to get counters on this thing like relatively quickly. I like that. You know, again, cards like Case of the Filched Falcon could go really well with this, because not only do you get the little stat boost when you play Case of the Filched Falcon, but you'll eventually be able to have that 4/3 flyer and a god knows how big wormlet. I think it's probably an honest to god worm by the time it's a 4/4. I don't think it's a wormlet anymore at that. Once you play like 3 artifacts, you know, so all I'm saying is I don't know why people don't play this more, or at least try to make it work more often, because I think if more people were trying to make this card work, it would have worked by now. I really think that Wormlet does suffer a bit from people having forgotten its presence in the meta, because I think there's so much you can do with this, especially with the release of the last couple of sets. Now, my number 6 is Hulking Raptor. This is probably the card that most doesn't fit one of my rules, right? You got to be able to build a deck around it, but I'd argue that you can build your deck around hoping you get a turn 3 Hulking Raptor, right? If you're able to play a 2-drop ramper of any kind, get this on turn 3, then it should not be too hard to have all of the, like 12 mana when you untap on turn 4. And the best part is, this doesn't actually tap to add the mana, you know? It's not like a mana dork or something that if you tap it, then suddenly it can't benefit from the Nissa that it's helping you play, right? If you play like a Nissa Ascended Animus the turn after you play this, which is fairly easy to do, then suddenly it's swinging in for like 1,000,000 damage that turn, and it helped you cast the Nissa, which is really important, by the way. Still has the ward, try to target it, you can't. The fact of the matter is that if we are in the kind of standard Magic where a 4 mana 5 power thing that gives you 2 mana every single turn isn't good enough, then like, what are we doing? It has ward too, you can't. If that card's not good enough, what are we doing? So I'm pretty sure the card actually is good enough. Now, halfway through the list, my number 5 is Fight Rigging. This is the most expensive card on the list. It's like 95 cents. People are trying to make this thing work, and Honestly, I feel like they tried a little bit harder a few months ago. It seemed like 6 months ago you would see a lot more of this card, but I actually think it's better now than it's ever been. In case you've been away from Standard for a little while now, the last couple of sets have given us a ton of 3 and even 2-drop creatures that work with fight rigging. You know, in case you haven't seen the Ancient one yet, this is a 2-mana 8/8, and even though it's going to be a while before it gets attacking, it can definitely get your fight rigging to trigger and give you that free card, like on turn 3. So I'm pretty sure you want that. Also, from the same set, there's actually Pugnacious Hammerskull, another 3-drop that works with fight rigging. And if you want another 3-drop that works with fight rigging, we got yet another one in Murders at Markov Manor. It's like Hunted Bone Brood, you know, it's a 3-mana 6-power creature. So, you know, it used to just be like Shakedown heavy, and that's basically it. But if you haven't looked into fight rigging in a good long time, we've actually got way more good, like playable, not embarrassing creatures than ever that make this card work now. In at number 4 is the man of the hour. It's Slogurk, Coach McGurk, the Overslime, only about 35-40 cents to get your hands on this card right now, and it just took home the biggest, you know, money Magic Standard tournament of the last few years. So why is it number 4? First of all, I just kind of plainly think there are 3 budget cards that are just straight up better than this, so there is that. But secondly, and maybe more importantly, yes, Slogurk's 35 cents. All the cards in the Slogurk deck are really expensive, except for like Aftermath Analyst. That's like 25-30 cents right now. But in case you wanted to buy other cards in that deck, then yeah, the Atraxa, again, we've already talked about that, like 25-30 bucks for the Atraxa. Breach the Multiverses are in there. That's like $6.50. Takenuma is an important card in the deck. It goes with the Jace combo. Those are both like $10 a piece. So a really expensive deck to build. Slogurk still remains surprisingly very cheap and has not spiked yet. But can't really give him that much credit because all the other cards you'd have to build aren't necessarily budget. Last thing though, you could probably still build a budget deck around Slogurk. That's all I'll say, is that you're not confined to this Soul Tide deck with $20 cards. There's probably still a sweet little Simic budget build for Slogurk in Standard. But let's get to the top 3, everybody. These are not only super cheap cards, but in most cases, these are relatively cheap decks to build. Even stuff like Squirming Emergence. Now, you're going to have to buy an Atraxa or 2 if you really want to play this deck the right way. There are $10, $20, $30 cards that go in this deck, and just like any Soul Tide deck, the mana base is going to be reasonably expensive. Any 3-color deck at all, as a matter of fact. So you do have to still worry about those problems, but this isn't quite as expensive as a Slogurk deck, and in a lot of ways, it's more fun and honestly easier to pilot than that deck too. And you get to play reasonably cheap cards. Again, you're going to have to buy an expensive card here or there if you really want to play the optimal version of this deck. But most of your cards are going to be stuff like Otherworldly Gaze, which is like 5 or 10 cents. Same thing with like Philology Archaeologist, a card the deck actually plays, and it's like 5 cents to play this card. And it's actually not a terrible card either, but you get my point. That a lot of the cards in this deck, including Emergence itself, are all going to be well under $1 to put into your deck. And when you're able to build like a reasonable, relatively cheap in terms of cost, extremely fun and powerful, which is important, deck, all for like a couple of $100, I think you're doing pretty well in Standard. But geez, a couple of $100? Let's try and take that price down as much as we can, right? So number 2 is Amalia Benavides Aguirre, my favorite life gain card of all time. And that is actually a kind of a tough spot to achieve. Unlike things like Slogurk and even Squirming Emergence, most of the cards in this deck are going to be righteously, radically cheap to actually get your hands on. Stuff like Lunark Veteran, a good Magic card. Case of the Uneaten Feast, a good Magic card. Voice of the Blessed, a good Magic card, and kind of some redundancy with Amalia, surprisingly cheap. Also under $1 for that card. Even stuff like My Fiance, LSL Core, has stayed relatively cheap to buy. You've got stuff like Vron in the format. Again, if you want to go kind of a more aristocrats route, there's a ton of really good life gain cards in Standard right now that are low on the curve, actually relatively competitive to play. This strategy is, for the first time in a while, in fun. I'm telling you, life gain has not been this strong in a really long time. It is fun to play. It is fast to play. It is competitive feeling to play the thing. And if you like triggers, this one squeezes them off fast. So I'm telling you, you haven't played with Amalia yet? Give it a shot. It's actually cheap to pick this card up and the entire deck for that matter. Now, this next card is the backbone of a deck that is not the cheapest deck in Standard you can possibly buy, but it's also nowhere near the most expensive. And if you want a competitive Standard deck, this will deliver those results. So that in mind, let's take a look at number 1. Ivy, Gleeful Spell Thief. Even if you stay Simic, you're definitely going to want Venerated Raw Priest in the deck. That's a little under $5 a piece, $20 for a playset. That actually isn't so bad when you consider the entire rest of the deck is going to be super duper cheap. All of the stuff like, Shore Up, super cheap to protect your guys, even stuff like March of Swirling Mist, which you're probably going to want in the deck, is not that expensive at present. Stuff like Slip Out the Back, super cheap card to buy. Royal Treatment or Tyvar's Stand or whatever, super cheap cards to buy. You can even build a Simic mana base for reasonably cheap at the moment. So again, if you do end up building Bant Toxic, it's not going to cost you $400, but it's also not going to cost you, $200 for the most part. It's going to be a cheap deck. And again, if you keep it Simic Toxic, you can probably make this thing work for like $65. And it's actually a deck that can take home an F&M, if not a large event. So if you're interested in playing Paper Standard again, but you don't want to spend a whole lot of money, I think that Simic Toxic is actually kind of one of the best places to start. Again, something I've mentioned in the last couple of entries, if you want a fun deck to pilot, look no further than this either. This has an awful lot going for it, from budget to competitive to how fun it actually is to play with the stinking thing. This is a very fun deck. So just give it a shot if you haven't yet. It won't cost you too much. Now that is all that I've got for this one, but I really cut a bunch of cards from this list. And honestly, some of them are probably going to show up in our next video. Again, we're about to do the top 10 sleepers in Standard. Note that a lot of cards from this video are cards you probably knew about, but I'm going to try and focus on cards that no one remembers in our next video. So if you're, interested in overturning every rock in Standard and seeing what we can find, make sure you subscribe to the channel, like this video, put in more recommended feeds and all that stuff. Do the YouTube stuff before you get out of here. Make sure you thank the sponsor of the video, Misty Mountain Gaming. They're partnering up with the GalaxyCon series. Get your booty to Richmond March 15th through the 17th and participate in that 10K Standard tournament. Take Simic Toxic, see how well you do. While we're at it, we also have to thank the patron of the day. Just because we have like a real sponsor doesn't mean the patrons aren't still sponsoring the content by and large. So Jumbo Brown, I see you. You've been a patron for a really, really long time, and you're a man after my own heart. I see you out there. You're a good dude, and I just wanted to let you know I appreciate you and I see you. You are valid, my friend. You've always been valid. Everybody loves you. You're a good guy. But either way, thank Jumbo Brown down there in the comments section for helping bring this video to you. And if you're interested in being a patron, well, first of all, there's benefits. It means you get to vote on what videos we do around here. That's why we're about to do the top 10 sleepers in Standard. So if you want to affect the course of YouTube history and pick what videos we do, then make sure you go down there in the description. That's what it's called. I was going to say the doobly-doo. Go to the description and click on that Patreon link. Check it all out. $1 a month is all I ask, and it really supports the channel. Aside from that, we play Magic on Twitch. Link in the description, and it's also on screen right now in text. You see that? How did that get there? What is that? Go away. Anyway, that's all I've got. That's all I've got for this one, guys. So just let me know what cards you would have put on your list. Anything that I missed, I am really interested in down there in the comments. But aside from that, basically Allski Kowalski. So I'll catch you cats later. I'm Deb from the place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.